name's Alyssa Cedillo. I'm the clinical director at Tree of Life Counseling Center and the founder of Root of It Foundation. We have the honor of having Dr. Mónica Rodríguez Delgado with us here today. She is one of our amazing clinicians at Tree of Life Counseling Center, as well as an adjunct professor at UTSA in the counseling department. If I were to list all of the different activities and involvements that Mónica gets involved in, it would take us half of our video. But I wanted to spend some time today talking with her about her upcoming training that she's going to do with us. I'm very excited about it. And in the end of the day, many times we read the bios and read the objectives, but it doesn't really convey the passion behind it or the intention behind why we're offering these trainings. And at Tree of Life, we're very transparent, and we want to make sure that everybody knows what our intentions are and why we are doing what we're doing. So Dr. Rodríguez will be presenting for us on August 16th from 10 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. virtually and in person. You have the choice to attend in person or virtual, and it will be cultural opportunities with Latine children in play therapy. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mónica and tell us a little bit about why you're doing this training and what about it, drew you to feel the need to present with us.
Yeah, I've been doing work with the Latina community since I started being a practicum student in my master's program. I think for me, just like everything that I do as a clinician, as an educator, it's rooted in something deeply personal, right? And so for me, my identity as a Latina or Mexicana, Americana too, right? My parents are immigrant. I was born in the States, is really the predominant reason why I do the work that I do. I'm going to say right now that when I was in my master's program, there weren't a lot of folks that looked like me. There weren't a lot of people who spoke my language. And it was very hard. It was hard to find trainers. It was hard to find mentors. It was hard to figure out what I was doing. I kind of had to figure it out on my own a lot of the times. And what that led to is not great work with clients, right? Because if I wasn't getting the training, if I wasn't getting the mentorship, I was just kind of failing along the way and figuring out what worked. And I didn't want to use my clients like that, right? And so, but unfortunately, that's what ended up happening. Even though I believe that I did really amazing work, it could have been better, right? It could have been just giving more opportunities to dignify mental health for them, right? And so I think I do the work because it is deeply personal. It is something that is important. And the community usually gets a lot of the times leftovers, right? Or things that don't fit. And we're trying to make it fit. We're trying to have them fit our modalities rather than us change and adapt and be flexible. And rather than us being the ones that change, we want them to change to fit us, right? And that's definition of oppression. And I don't like that. And so for me,
you know what, I will say that I always appreciate that about you, Monica, that many times in our profession, people tend to be like, I never make mistakes, that in order to be a provider, that we're perfect. And so one thing I've always appreciated about you is the honesty and that, yeah, I did the best I could when I could with what I had, but that you've always strived to do more, to do better, to invest more in the community. And it seems to me with working with you, it has always been that you take care of yourself and there is self-care and all that, but the priority has always been the impact to the community and the people that you serve.
yeah, no, the community. I always say, like, I like to be involved, immersed. Like, who are my neighbors here? Who are the people that are around? Because that informs my work, right? That informs not only my work, but who I am as a human. Because I know that every client that comes to me impacts my life, changes my life, right? And so I want to know who these humans are, right? And so that I can give the best of myself, right? And if we don't have the training, we don't have the know-how, we don't have the skills or the tools, even though we can give our best, but there's also a best version of that, right? And so for me, I think that finally learning through the mistakes that I made, like me and a couple of other colleagues, right? Like what I present isn't just solely me, right? We're all connected. And so it is a culmination and combination of a lot of people's work, of indigenous practice work, right? Because we were rooted and founded, a lot of our counseling practices are founded in colonized indigenous practices. And so I think that the work that I bring here and in the trainings, it really is not just my wisdom, but the wisdom of the community and folks that I have worked with. And so I just tend to be the spokesperson for it, right? Like I'm the face at that moment. But that the information really comes from a lot of different areas and spaces.
Yeah, and I think that's important for us to note that, as providers, we may have a degree, we have papers behind these things, but that it is really the collective wisdom, knowledge of our communities at large that we are now bringing together to offer to people so that they don't have to find it in piecemeal everywhere else, but they can go to one, a place and be like, hey, let's have these conversations. Let's look into this. Um, for you, I know we talked a little bit about what's behind this. Tell us a little bit about your training and what people are going to be able to learn and glean from the training that you have coming up.
Yeah. So one of the biggest things, and I mentioned before, right? Like it was a scarcity within the just having the trainers there or like the clinicians there. And one of the really cool things that I've seen in the last years is that more and more folks are wanting to learn about this, and particularly how to work with the Latina community in play therapy or children and families, right? And I think that the misconception becomes, let's just add toys, right? Let's just add these
Oh,
materials.
yes.
I know. And that makes sense if we're coming from a very particular perspective, but it really is about you. It's about who you are, the most culturally I don't want to call this material, but the most culturally important thing in that space is you, right? As a clinician. And so I think for me, this training is important. It really talks about, first, let's look at the information that's out there, right? Like what are some of the important things that we should know as clinicians when we're working with this community and with these children and families? Also recognizing that it isn't cookie cutter, right? There's a lot of difference within the community, right? We just tend to put it all in a box, but there's a lot of different boxes and some boxes merge. And so it's not really a box. It's kind of, I don't know what to call it, but
And the
it's just
reality that not all of these identities are digestible for people,
yeah.
that they don't have to be.
Well, and even when I said the word Latina, right? Like even if we go into just labels themselves, right? Latine, Latina,
Chicana, chicano,
Chicana,
chicanx.
Chicano, Chicanx, right? Using the X, there's just so much nuance in that. There's so much difference. There's so much conversation that can just happen with that word because I'm in the transition of you maybe transitioning away from the word Latina or Latine and into like what is my ethnical, well, not ethnical,
Your
but like
identity.
my identity, right? Which is more Mexicana. My parents are from Mexico. Rather than using an all-encompassing word that we just decided as a
A
society.
monolith for us.
Exactly, like the word Hispanic that is made up, right? But everybody uses it. And so even that, and it's not right or wrong, like there's nothing right or wrong about that, right? It's just it is, and everyone's going to have a different opinion. And so just a label can be a 30-minute conversation, right?
Yeah.
And so when we talk about how to work with a community, if we don't understand those just minute differences of somebody preferring to be called Hispanic versus Latina versus Mexicana or Puerto Rican, right? That all of these can have an impact on the relationship, whether it can improve it or whether it can be a detriment to it. So I think because of all of this difference and all of these shifts and changes that we've had, even in the mental health perspective, I think that this training is really important to just give what our community needs, right? And its connection in the way that is important for them in a very holistic way. And so what does that look like? I mean, the training is going to talk a little bit about that, but for me, it's bringing in a lot of different pieces. And then also looking at our interventions and how do they align or misalign with our communities? How do they make sense for our communities? Because it's not all like, the saying, I'm not really good with sayings because I wasn't really in this culture, but like throwing the baby with the bathwater or something like
Yeah.
that, right?
The very English sayings that are like hard to translate.
Yeah. I'm just like, I don't know what that means, but it sounds correct. I've heard people use it in this way. But it's not all bad, right? So can we keep the things that make sense for our communities, and then incorporate and take away, right? Like take away the things that don't make sense for the communities that we serve. And that takes a lot of mentorship and consultation and supervision and working collaboratively with communities in order to figure that out. Like we can't figure that out as an individual. So
Nor is it our place.
yeah, exactly. And so if you are thinking this training is going to be like, here's a PowerPoint, let me give you information. Not really, right? Like I want to say that it depends on who shows up, right? I've had trainings where yes, we go by what's going on there, but what is the curiosity in the room is really important for me, right? So if I have if I have something that I'm presenting, I'm definitely going to go by the outline to make sure that we're following, again, going back to like CEs and things like that. So making sure
We have
that
to
we're
follow the rules.
following some of those rules and or following all of those rules, right? But also making space for the curiosity that's in the room. And because a lot of the times what comes up for us is different, right? If we're working with a community that isn't well researched or and again, I say research because when we're looking at how we're teaching things, it usually comes from research. What do we know about research is that our communities are not represented in that very well, right?
No.
And so we're creating these interventions based on numbers that don't represent our communities. So we have to do something different, right? We have to do something different and we have to explore. Right now we're in the exploration phase and I can't explore by myself, right? So it's exploration with the folks that show up, right? Thinking about how are you as a clinician? What wisdom do you have that you would like to share with the room as well? So there is going to be some didactic, right? Like teaching, but there's also going to be room for us to have conversation about what are you already doing? You already have knowledge and that knowledge is powerful for all of us to know.
And you used the word show up a couple times. And I think that is pretty accurately represented, that what we're asking people to do is to show up.
Yeah.
Is to show up as their authentic self, to have these conversations, to have these deeper thought. And the reality of the matter is, as far as the reason that Tree of Life is offering some of these things is because I have not seen these trainings being offered, and specifically within the play therapy community. Oftentimes what we've seen is that there are trainings that are about LGBTQIA and the intersectionalities of BIPOC, but many times these trainings are presented by white bodies or by people who don't live or in a body that understands what it is like to experience being BIPOC, being Latine. And I will be clear about this. We use Latine at Tree of Life because, and I'll be honest with you, I don't identify as Latine. Nothing in me is Latin. I am Chicana. But we will use sometimes these terms because many times those in our community who haven't had the opportunity or the space to delve deeper, that's the only word that they identify with, the only word that they can recognize as part of their community. And so, like you said, in these trainings, I think we're going to have a lot of conversations about how we are not a monolith and we don't want to represent our communities in that way. But sometimes there's a form you got to fill out, and to put every single identity on there is not realistic. And so I think we're going to have some more conversations and this is why we're making this video, is that the objectives and what we put out, yes, they are accurate. Yes, they're going to happen in these trainings, but there's going to be so much more that we're going to discuss that can't be put into a small soundbite.
Yeah, sure. And if we're doing it justice, this would be more of a series than just a one-time deal, right? But right now, I think of where we're at, like this is just where we start, right? The starting point. Where do we?
Who's willing to show up?
Yeah.
Right. Who's willing to show up in these conversations and these spaces and to invest, not just with us, but invest in community and themselves.
For sure. And to acknowledge that it takes courage, right? It takes a lot of courage to show up. It takes a lot of energy to show up. And when we think about even folks that know Spanish and are bilingual and how much you're being probably told to do things that are extra, right? And so asking you to show up does take energy and we acknowledge that, right? And if there is a part of you that does have space for this, it's important work, right? It's important work because I'm sure that this is a work that you want to do versus things that are and expectations that other place about on you, right?
And also that they deserve access to.
Yes,
Right? So
absolutely.
a little bit like, I know we're shifting gears a little bit, but to me it isn't. Um, Tell me why with Tree of Life that you're wanting to work with us and to do these trainings to offer these opportunities for people in the community.
Well, and I think so. I have a perspective that's both a clinician and also a counselor educator, right? So I work a lot with students as well. And for me, I love Tree of Life because it's who I am. I don't know how to explain it other. It's hard to explain this in words, but it really is who I am as a clinician. And we talk about counselor integration. So how do you integrate yourself, who you are as a person, into your counselor identity? And I feel like Tree of Life is that for me. A lot of the times when I was going through training programs, they gave me a very prescriptive way of how counseling looks, what counseling isn't, big no-nos in counseling. Even to the point where I would tell people, like, I would see my Spanish speaking moms, right? And they would come in and I'd be like, you want some coffee? Let's drink coffee together. They'll bring cookies, right? And when I would tell that to supervisors, they would, a lot of the times they would be like, okay, let's talk about that. Like, where's that coming from? Which I think is a really great conversation to have. I don't think that that was negative in any way, but the tone was very much like you are doing something not okay, right?
Yeah.
Rather than let's explore where this is coming from. It was more so, no, like, what are you doing here? Like, you're supposed to be in an open stance and with your feet on the ground and like very robotic and
Yeah.
and so the ways in which we learn counseling can be very rule oriented, which rules are good, right? Rules are absolutely
Until it's
good
rigid.
until it's super rigid to where rules only fit a particular community, right? Or a particular, let's name it like a white middle class, community, where that's not all of my clients, especially as a Spanish speaker, especially someone who identifies as Mexican or as a Latina or, a daughter of immigrants. Like, that's not who I serve most of the time. So I think looking at what am I incorporating into myself? I have spiritual practices that are rooted in indigeneity. So for example, my mom back, when I was little, if I got scared, she would do the susto limpia on me, right? Unfortunately, the longer that she was here, those practices were stripped from her, right? That they were something that she no longer practices. And it's something that I'm reclaiming. And how do I then incorporate that into my counseling practices for clients that are looking for that, right? That are looking for a connection with the earth, a connection with the herbs that we drink in our teas, in our coffee. Our coffee beans are part of a plant, right? How do we practice, maybe mindfulness with understanding that those type of connections, which I think for me, Tree of Life allows the space for me to be my most authentic self with my clients, and that my clients are very receptive to that, right? Like, they're just like, I never thought that I could experience this, or I never thought that I could do this in therapy, or I thought that this part of myself I couldn't bring in, or I couldn't show up in a therapeutic space with. And I said, I'm not going to say that that's not an unfounded fear, right? That does happen in certain practices. And that's why I was very intentional when I decided to work here, right? Because I think that not just the permission, but the openness to be able to give clients what they want, what they need, and for me to show up authentically in that, to bring all of my healing, not just one particular kind of healing. We talk about energy work, all kinds of things that we
I'm
can.
hearing also like the healing not just of yours, but like like we talked about a little bit earlier, like the collective healing, the collective wisdom of our communities, our people, our ancestors, that they don't have to stay outside the therapeutic arena. They're needed and wanted here in the space.
Healing is collective, right? Like healing is collective. Now, there are certain things that we have to come into mind when it comes to like rules and things like that. So like sometimes we do have to abide by certain rules when we talk about the collective and healing, but like when we invite ancestors, when we invite energy, when we invite our knowing from like the knowledge from like a great grandmother or somebody in, like it's no longer just two people in that space. And I think that
Yeah.
yeah, it isn't, right? It's not only is it your like mine are also helping me guide, right? Or mine are also helping me with the words that come out of my mouth, with the things, there are moments where I'm like, I don't know why I said that. I would have never said that, and I
But
had
that
to,
harnessed something from
yeah,
somewhere that came
like
in.
someone told me, like whispered in my ear to say that, right? And it was just what the client needed in those moments. And so I think for me, being able to show up in spaces as authentic, it was really important that I'm here, right? Because with Tree of Life, it gives me the opportunity to show up authentically, which means that healing can occur in a lot of different ways in that session, and that my clients get the absolute best of me.
We are very grateful to have you at Tree of Life and honored to have you as part of the team. Something else to note is that with Tree of Life Counseling Center, we do talk a lot about decolonizing and decolonizing the therapeutic relationship. And I hear a lot of people use that word and talk in that way without a deeper understanding or knowing of what that means. And can I give you a quick soundbite of all of that? No, but I can tell you very directly that decolonization is the showing up, the responsibility and the requirement of individuals to really recognize that this isn't just changing or identifying areas where we can improve, but it is requiring us to really challenge ourselves, not just like our internalized belief, our concepts, some theoretical practices, principles that we were taught about living, some very deeply ingrained concepts and beliefs. We're requiring ourselves to challenge, to learn, to unlearn, to relearn how we can show up in ways that are separate from these colonized views that as providers we are the all-knowing, the all-beings, that people come to us and we provide healing, when that is not really the case. Decolonization, part of it is requiring us to really recognize the inner healer, the wisdom of people, knowing that they know themselves better than we ever will, and that we are required as providers to sit back and really, it's hard and deep and difficult work to tear apart all of these ideas that we have and say what part of these is really truly honoring myself and community at large, and what part of this may be really, really created as oppressive concepts to keep us busy, to keep us distracted, to keep us separate from our internal sense of knowing and who we truly are and what we truly know to be. Decolonization means that we are very deeply connected, not just with ourselves, but with each other, with the earth, with the environment, with um, the reality that the climate is changing, the reality that socioeconomic statuses are a factor. It's not just one thing. It requires every aspect of our life to really look at and see where we can root out concepts and beliefs within ourselves and within other communities that no longer serve us and probably never served us. And so we're asking people to show up and be willing to do this work that is not easy. You will not get a PowerPoint on it. You're not going to get some quick 1-2 step guide. Those concepts are rooted in white supremacy and colonization. There is no, as much as people want that, I would challenge you to really look deep and say, why is it that you feel you need a 1-2 step process? Why do you feel that someone has to direct you in all these things when instead we should be looking at it as our own responsibility to really look at what areas do I need to identify and uproot, what areas are there. And I wouldn't say that it's all about uprooting and taking away, but what areas are there within us with concepts and beliefs that deserve nurture, that deserve care, that deserve recognition, that deserve space. And so with all of the trainings that we're offering, I'm really asking people to show up and to be willing to do the work, not just by themselves, but in community and collective, and to actively support each other. That will say that we have to have open minds and open hearts and being willing to allow conversations about what moves us. So we look forward to working with you. We hope to see you soon.